Story 1. This was a long time ago, but the first time I got my eyes checked, I was in first or second grade or something. The optometrist told my mom I'm almost completely blind in one eye. She looks at me and asks why I wouldn't say anything. I said I thought everyone only had one working eye. Story 2. An old archaeologist moved in next door when I was about 6, and he asked me to go look on his driveway to help find fossils that he might have dropped while moving in. I found 2 that I still have to this very day. He told me to keep them. I was an adult before I realized he placed them there for me to find. He was a very nice old professor. Not to mention how cool I became in the eyes of my friends for owning fossils. Story 3. I didn't know my mom had a name until in first grade. The teacher asked us what our mothers' names were. Everyone answered but me. I never realized my mom had a name. I questioned my entire existence. I went to her straight after school. She was cooking in the kitchen. I asked her, "Mama, what's your name?" She smiled, stopped cooking, and came down to my height and told me her name. It was a sweet memory, but man, I felt shame that I didn't know that sooner. Story 4. So I'm not a native speaker, which might make this somewhat excusable. But for the longest time, I thought sitcoms were named that because the main characters spend most of their time sitting, like in a living room or in a bar. Story 5. You can click "Don't accept any cookies," and websites work just fine. I always thought that would also disable essential cookies, so I would either accept all or go through the motions of only allowing essential ones. Story 6. A few years back, I realized that the Christmas song, "I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus," wasn't actually about the mother being unfaithful with St. Nicholas, but it was just the dad dressed as Santa. For almost my entire life, I thought the mom was just not being loyal. I was 26 when I realized otherwise. Story 7. When I was teaching, I said something would be ludicrous, and the whole class looked at me with interest and surprise. They didn't know Ludacris, the rapper's name, was a pun. Story 8. There was a Reddit comment years ago I wish I would have saved. The original poster was about 8 years old and saw her dad pump gas. She asked what the numbers were: 87, 89, and 93. Her dad said it was the year the gas was made, implying newer gas is more expensive. That answer worked for her at the time. Years later, the original poster was about 19, riding in her boyfriend's car, and offered to get out and pump gas for him. She asked, "What year gas do you use?" Astonished, she explained more and he ended up in tears, laughing. Story 9. I only recently realized that the phrase, "with friends like these, who needs enemies?" is actually implying that you have awful friends, not that you have friends so good that you don't need to worry about your enemies. Story 10. I recently discovered that honey isn't spicy. My husband was buying a bottle of hot honey, and I made some comment about the ridiculous marketing, since all honey is already spicy. Turns out I'm just allergic. Story 11. I visited Rome with my mom when I was 6 or 7. We were staying in line to go to the toilet in the Colosseum, and she suddenly pointed to a crack in the wall and said that there was something there. I checked it out, and it was a Roman coin. Of course, I thought that it was real and kept it, and told everyone I knew about it. I realized that my mom just staged it all only 10 years later. Still, amazing memories though. Story 12. I guess it's not that obvious, but my mom just had the revelation that Vermont is French for green mountains, from Vertsmonts. Story 13. Okay, hopefully at least one person will find this comment way down the list. I remember in sex education learning that you could get human immunodeficiency virus from unprotected sex. I then thought to myself how beautiful it was that when a married couple wanted to have a child, they would risk getting human immunodeficiency virus because to do so, they would have to have unprotected sex. It wasn't until years later, and I mean way later, that I came to understand that it spread from person to person through unprotected sex. I thought it was just a random consequence that would occur sometimes when you had unprotected sex, like it would just appear like scraping your knee or something. Oh wow. Story 14. I was in my 40s when I realized that the phrase mano a mano meant hand to hand, as in a fist fight, not man to man. I took Spanish in high school and college too. According to my other fine Redditors, it can also mean man to man and a few other things. Thanks. Fellow Redditors. Story 15. I only learned recently that revenge is a dish best served cold, which means you should take your revenge at a much later time when your opponent won't be expecting it. Story 16. My dad was 50 when he realized that sea glass wasn't a living creature. We realized his misunderstanding when he said, "Wow, they look just like real glass. Nature is so beautiful." We were perplexed and asked him what he meant. He thought it was some kind of living animal that just happens to look and feel like glass. We were big shell collectors at the time, so he was very familiar with the beach. There's really no explanation for this one. Story 17. Just the other day, my wife said, "Hell in a ham basket." I asked, "What's a ham basket?" It's then that she realized it was hand basket. We're in our 30s. It was hilarious. Story 18. I was like 12 when I realized that you were supposed to close your eyes to fall asleep faster. Before that, I just stared at the ceiling and waited until I fell asleep. Story 19. I was 42 when I had an epiphany about water towers and tanks. They are not for storing water for an emergency. They are for storing water for water pressure. I figured it out when I wondered why the water never went off when all other utilities went out during storms. Felt pretty stupid. As one commenter said when I posted this before, they are not so towns can put their names on them, as if to say, "Look how much water we've got." Back in the day, some guys were flying around counting geese and ducks for a migration study. Engrossed in their task, they got lost in the days before GPS, so they buzzed a small town's water tower to read the name, then got out their map. Story 20. For me, it wasn't until recently that I found out I am allergic to cucumbers. I used to think the numbness they caused in my mouth was normal, similar to how peanuts affect me. Turns out, I am also allergic to peanuts, which I only learned about recently too. Story 21. This is an embarrassing one. I grew up with a speech impediment and spoke pretty much just like Neil Goldman from Family Guy. I never went to speech therapy, nor has anyone tried to help correct me. That's just how I spoke. I was self-conscious about it. Classmates jabbed a bit, but nothing too serious. It wasn't until after high school at 19 that while I was just randomly making silly sound effects with my mouth, I placed my tongue in a certain position and noticed, hey, this sounds like a normal way to talk. Is this where my tongue was supposed to be this whole time when I spoke those words? From that moment forward, I spoke normally. It was a huge revelation for me, but I also felt so foolish. I should clarify it wasn't a lisp. I should have written speech impediment instead. Story 22. I had no idea that they moved the holes on a golf course. I am 32 years old. I always thought the concept of golf was mega boring anyway. But playing the same course over and over again, who would even bother? No one would, which is why they moved the holes. Story 23. You can take as many bananas as you want. I always assumed I had to take however many were connected together. I've had so many bananas go bad on me. Laugh out loud. Story 24. Not me, but a friend. She grew up in a town with a giant water tower right above the jail. She just realized that it's a water tower and not a place where the prisoners were kept. She's 32. Story 25. Banks have height measurements at doors in case they get robbed and can tell how tall the robber is. I didn't know that was what it was for until recently. Story 26. My mother told me that cured meat was from animals that had died of a disease and had been cured after death so they could be sold. I took this information to college, where I was studying to become a chef. Story 27. I was about 40, and I had never heard the phrase camel toe. My friend made a comment about this girl in a show we were watching, and when he mentioned it, I said, "What's wrong with her toes? They look normal." He spit out his drink as he broke into a long laugh. Story 28. I only just realized that the phrase, "you can't have your cake and eat it too," actually makes sense. For years, I thought it was just nonsense. Like, why wouldn't you eat the cake if you have it? But it finally clicked that it means you can't eat the cake and still have it in front of you. It's either one or the other. I felt both embarrassed and enlightened at the same time. Story 29. When people say, "We should go for a coffee sometime," it doesn't necessarily have to be coffee, so you don't have to decline because you don't like coffee. You just say yes and then you do something else. Also, when people dim the lights and put candles on, they are trying to set the mood, not save electricity. Story 30. I have been teaching college in the same department for 8 years. I had the 4-digit copier code memorized. I realized for the first time this week that the copier code is the department office number. Story 31. Recently, I learned that making eye contact doesn't mean staring directly into a person's eyes without looking away. It always made me really uncomfortable to do that. Story 32. I was in my late 30s when my friend heard me say, "The ghost is clear," and started laughing hysterically, informing me that it's "the coast is clear." I didn't really use that term too often, so I guess it never came up. We still laugh about it years later. Story 33. I typically need to look up the definition of words that I thought I understood. For example, the word triage. I always thought it meant to help or aid people who come into a hospital until they can be seen by a doctor, surgeon, and so on. And I even extended it to mean when someone is really sick, isolate that person or give them a mask. I didn't know it was purely a way to categorize people to determine in what order they'll be seen due to how severe their condition is. Story 34. In interviews, when they say, "Tell me about yourself," they mean as it pertains to work, not generally about yourself. And thank goodness. I don't want to tell them about myself. Story 35. This was from 2001. News coverage in the first few days after the September 11th attacks included many mentions of box cutters. I thought to myself, box cutters? Huh? What's that? This went on repeatedly in the news with no pictures, so I remained puzzled for days. Finally, a TV news story showed a picture of a box cutter. Oh, it's a utility knife. I had never before heard it called anything other than a utility knife. Story 36. When I was a small child, I was introduced to Newman's own brand of everything. Fig Newman's, Newman-O's, salad dressing, pasta sauce, you name it. I always thought it was just some nice guy who had a good company. It wasn't until I was 27 that I actually made the connection to Paul Newman. Me. The Newman's own guy looks kind of like Paul Newman. Dad. Well, it's his company. Me. Dad. Me. Oh. Story 37. There was a Reddit thread a few years back that asked something like, "What was a misconception you had when you were little?" And someone posted that they thought those rolls of hay in the field with cows were actually something the cows did. Laughing. Story 38. After years of listening to crime podcasts and wondering why almost all of the US criminals drive this car brand sedan, and why I've never seen it where I live, my husband informed me that it's not a brand but a model. Story 39. I didn't know that pickles are cucumbers. I'm a history buff, have a master's, and when my girlfriend said we should make our own pickles, I said, "It's a little late in the summer to grow pickles. I'll never live that one down," but her reaction was priceless, and she's marriage material. Edit. Everything is fine. I understand pickled vegetables now. Story 40. I was over 30 years old when I found out the phrase apples and oranges means that the things being compared are different. Really different. I thought it meant different, but still really similar. Like, hey, it's all fruit. I still laugh to the point of tears about how unaware I was. Story 41. This isn't about me, but my best friend. When she was a kid, she accidentally cut a worm in half. She was devastated and went to her dad in tears. He comforted her by saying it was okay because now there were 2 worms, and they would be best friends forever. Fast forward to when she was 26 and taking a course, her teacher, for some reason, mentioned that a worm cut in half actually dies. That moment shattered her sweet and innocent childhood belief. Story 42. My dad spent a lot of time in the office even during the weekends. He also went on vacations without my mom because someone had to watch over the dogs. When my mom left, he came clean about his double life and I was shocked. My brother and sister just looked at me with that, "Oh, come on, dude, look. I'm the eldest and I genuinely believed he loved his job and going solo on trips." Story 43. The wax that was used to seal envelopes and wine bottles is called sealing wax. I had heard the term hundreds of times, but I never made the connection between the term and the act of sealing something. I always thought the term was sealing wax and had absolutely no idea what it was used for. Story 44. I always thought people were being metaphorical whenever someone says to picture something in your head. Turns out you are actually supposed to be able to visualize things, and I have aphantasia. Story 45. I only realized a few years ago that the reason IKEA stores are painted blue and yellow was because those are the colors of the Swedish flag. I am 53 years old, have a master's degree, and was a contestant on Jeopardy! Story 46. Police officers intentionally put their hands on your car when they pull you over. If you are arrested, they can get the handprint documented to confirm that it was your car that was pulled over, and not someone else's if challenged in court. You can clearly see this in any police dashcam video. They touch the trunk or roof area of a car before speaking to you. Story 47. I like reading about history, and I read/watch several news sources daily, so I really should have known this. I watched the series Franklin recently, and it just occurred to me why the news media is called the press. I feel like an idiot. I said something about it to my husband, and he just looked at me like, yeah, duh. Story 48. When applying for a job, match your resume to the exact key terms in the listing, and in the interview, present yourself as if you perfectly match the search criteria, even if you check off most of the boxes but not others. Tell them what they want to hear. Don't be too honest. That last part is my biggest character flaw. Story 49. Whenever I would fill out applications for anything that had the question about the highest level of education, I never realized that some college meant some college. I thought it was referring to some as in a non-remarkable community college. I was always confused about why there was never an option for currently in college. Maybe I should drop out.